everyone. I'd like to read something action-packed from my book Jamalia. The Hippocampus burst from the water near the maelstrom. The crew gasped. "You must outrun the Kraken," Cyrus shouted. "He's coming. Sail northwest. I'll use the wind to push you." Gemma added, "We're going to my family, but we will return. Be safe." Cyrus raised his arms and summoned a great wind, billowing the sails and flinging the maelstrom far into the open sea. And then they watched, from their place high above. The sea below writhed and churned. A colossal shadow surged through the blackened waters. Breast the Kraken, risen from the abyss like a nightmare made flesh. His tentacles spanned across the leagues of ocean, trailing obsidian suckers rimmed in crimson, each large enough to drag a ship beneath the waves. The island quaked at his arrival, storms forming in his wake, as if the sea itself bent in fear. But another force rose to meet him. The water ahead exploded upward in a wall of foam and fury. The Megladon, Thauron, breached with the full might of the ancient deep, jaws wide like a monstrous gate to oblivion. His body was armored in pale gray scars, each one a story of survival, as long as 3 galleons lined end to end with eyes like polished coal, and teeth the length of scimitars. He was fury incarnate, and he struck first. The Megalodon slammed into the coiled bulk of the Kraken, biting deep into the base of one massive tentacle. Flesh tore like whale hides, and black ichor sprayed the sky. The Kraken shrieked, a sound not of this world, a kinging cry that split the air and sent birds plummeting from the clouds. The sea cracked beneath them. Breasts retaliated with fury. Tentacles as thick as trees lashed out, one smashing across the Megalodon's side with a crack like thunder. Another looped around the giant shark's midsection and hurled him back. Water rose in a massive wall, surging toward the island and crashing onto the shore, tearing trees from their roots and pulverizing stone walls. Lightning ripped the sky above as if nature itself couldn't bear witness. They circled these 2 ancient beasts, primordial and primal. The Kraken's tendrils writhed in fury, sweeping through the water like a net of living death. The Megalodon dove deep, twisted hard, and came screaming back up from below, ramming into the Kraken's core with enough force to lift the creature half out of the water. With impossible speed, Thauron clamped down on the Kraken's central mantle, teeth carving through the shell and muscle. The sea filled with boiling ichor, churning bubbles as the Kraken shrieked again, a pulse of psychic agony that echoed in the minds of all nearby. One tentacle speared into Thauron's gills. Another lashed around his tail, yanking him back. The Megalodon thrashed, gills flaring, and bit down hard, ripping one tentacle clean from the body. He threw it aside, a writhing, bloody coil that landed like a mountain into the surf. But Bress wasn't done. The Kraken erupted in full, his monstrous bulk rising out of the water like a nightmare of black armor and ancient rage. His massive eye bleeding, but burning red, locked onto the Megalodon, and with a force beyond comprehension he struck. Tentacles coiled around the shark's body, one after the other like snakes tightening on prey. They gripped the Megalodon's mouth, forcing it shut. They wrapped around his pectoral fins and tail, immobilizing him. The sea raged as the Kraken surged, dragging Thauron down into the trench. The water boiled from the violence. In a last desperate surge, the Megalodon twisted his entire frame, his muscles surging with titanic power. His teeth found the Kraken's central eye, crunching through the lens and bone. Breast screamed, the water exploding outward in a psychic shockwave, and threw Thauron back up toward the surface with an eruption of tentacles and blood. But the damage had been done. Breast bled heavily from his eye socket, ichor leaking in curtains, but he was not beaten. With a sound like the grinding of tectonic plates, he rose one final time, an apocalyptic silhouette framed in storm clouds and lightning, and he struck again. He wrapped the Megalodon in all remaining limbs and pulled. There was a horrible series of cracking pops. Bone broke, ribs split, and with a guttural roar from the deep, Breast the Kraken dragged the Megalodon under. The water stilled for only a moment before it roiled with red. A thunderous shockwave split the world apart as the island of Marauder Cay began to die. The sea floor shifted violently, earth split, forests crumbled, and Marauder Cay began to fall in on itself. The ground cracked in spiderweb veins, deep and groaning until entire forests collapsed in a roar of splintering wood. Stone towers tilted like drunkards, then crumbled to ash, swallowed by chasms that belched steam and red light. Buildings, trees, roads, entire histories disappeared beneath the sea, crushed and devoured as if the earth itself had turned ravenous. The very air shuddered as the sky darkened with falling debris, winds spiraling with screams of twisted magic and ancient vengeance, and then silence. The island was gone, not sunk, obliterated. Gemma clung tightly to Cyrus atop the hippocampus, her throat raw from crying out, her eyes wide with terror, as they hovered far enough away to survive, but not far enough to avoid the sight. She shook her head as she stared at the empty horizon, still half expecting to see some remnant of land. But there was nothing, just boiling sea and a scattering of driftwood. She turned toward the ship and froze. "The maelstrom," she whispered. "We can't see them anymore." Cyrus stood behind her on the hippocampus's back, his hand resting on her shoulder. "They're fast. They got away," he said, but his voice was taut, barely holding the weight of his own uncertainty. And then the water behind them surged. With a mighty gurgling howl that rattled their bones, something erupted from the depths. A monstrous, writhing horror with shredded tentacles, blasted skin, and black ichor pouring from countless gashes. Breasts. The Kraken was not dead, not yet. Its once mighty form now bore ruin, one eye crushed, half its beak missing, long rents in its obsidian hide, trailing gore like ink. Several tentacles had been severed entirely, and what remained lashed wildly through the water, some limp, others dragging uselessly behind it like broken anchors. But it was alive, and it was enraged. The sea boiled beneath its massive ruined bulk as it turned its cyclopean eye toward them. It had not forgotten. It had seen the princess flee, and now it hunted. Cyrus swore and clutched Gemma tighter. "Go!" he shouted to the hippocampus. "Dive now!" And the hippocampus obeyed. With a high, keening whinny, it arched into a deep dive, its shimmering tail slicing through the water like a blade. In a blink, they were submerged, surrounded by darkness and bubbles, the roar of the collapsing island fading behind them. But behind them, closer, thundered the Kraken. Even in its battered state, it moved with terrifying speed, drawn by ancient fury and an unrelenting need to reclaim its prize. Tentacles swept through the water with deadly force, brushing coral reefs, dislodging entire spires of rock from the seabed. Each pulse of its mantle drove it forward in convulsions of wrath. Gemma twisted to look behind them and gasped. It was gaining! The hippocampus veered between sharp ravines and swirling undercurrents, its sea dragon fins slicing a path no ordinary beast could follow. It glided along narrow crevices and ducked behind dense curtains of glowing jellyfish, weaving through labyrinths of underwater caves and ridges. Still, Breast pursued. A ruined tentacle struck a coral ridge behind them, sending up a shockwave of detritus and silk. Another lash cleaved through a school of glowing fish, leaving blood and bioluminescent trails in its wake. But the hippocampus was relentless, graceful, almost ghostly. It dove deeper into the twilight zone of the sea, where the light filtered in only in shimmering columns. The temperament dropped. Pressure mounted. Strange flickering creatures darted from shadows, and still the beast followed, until the hippocampus plunged through a narrow crevice in a limestone ridge and twisted into a concealed cavern no wider than a ship's mast. The moment they passed through, the creature stopped, hovering in silence. Behind them, Breast screamed. The sound vibrated through the water like an ancient curse. The crevice was too small. Massive, furious, and broken, the Kraken smashed its ruined bulk against the limestone wall. Tentacles reached, clawed, and scraped, but could not follow. A deep pulse of frustration echoed from its mantle as it thrashed once, twice, and then sank back, beaten. It was too large, too wounded, too late. Gemma was shaking in Cyrus's arms. The hippocampus turned, slowly rising again through the veils of the sea, gliding upward towards safety and light. Gemma looked back one last time at the dark shape, retreating in the depths, at the broken god of the sea fading into the darkness. They had escaped.